Welcome back to the Big Lad Podcast. In this episode, I speak to fellow podcast host Colin. We talk about what inspired his podcast in the first place and how he got it to the top 1% of podcasts. We also touch on elective sobriety and how it's helped Colin stay productive around a busy lifestyle. If you enjoy this episode, make sure you drop it a like, and if you're new, subscribe. I'll let you get on with the episode. Colin, welcome to the Big Lad Podcast. How are we doing?
Really good, George. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
No problem. First of all, I think we'll go start off with basically give yourself a little introduction, who you are, what you're up to, and we'll sort of go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Colin Campbell, as the listeners will tell from my accent, I am from a place called Bearsden, just outside Glasgow in Scotland, and I am what I would call an office athlete, and by that I mean that's somebody that looks to pursue the best possible peak performance in multiple areas. And the office part is my career as a full-time account director in the furniture space, supplying into student accommodation. And then the other side is the peak performance element in terms of physical capabilities and training and nutrition and all the things that combine alongside that. So I'm somebody that continues to still work in the full-time corporate world, but likes to try and pursue their best performance in the physical side of things in terms of how I look, how I train, how I perform. And then alongside that, and probably the main reason that we're having this conversation, is that I create content online around how I do that through both Instagram and my podcast, Campbell Conversations. And I'm very much somebody that likes to create rather than just consume when it comes to the online world as well.
I like the office athlete. I've never thought of it like that because obviously I'm also in the office 9 to 5 as well. I'm a project accountant. So I guess kind of similar. We both sort of strive for that fitness outside of the corporate world. One thing that I always like to find out is how you actually got into fitness to begin with, because everyone has their own sort of little story, how they got into fitness and sort of why they carry on doing it, essentially.
Absolutely, and the whole office athlete thing is very much like, can you perform at your absolute best self, both in your career and in the stuff that you do alongside? But my entry to fitness was absolutely not motivated by peak performance within a career and financially and building a career. It was very much started lifting weights through rugby. So as a kid, I always played rugby, never at a massively serious level, but always at a club level, at a relatively, occasionally playing for the local district and stuff like that, but nothing massively serious. When I was about 15, we started doing strength and conditioning, so got into the gym. Everyone was like growing at different rates as you do at that age. Some guys were massive with moustaches, other guys were smaller and more slender like myself. So for me to remain competitive and keep getting picked in the first team and doing well and progressing, I had to lift weights. And I would say that it was pretty much instant. We would go on a Monday night at 6 o'clock and we would get coached by a guy that used to be a physio for the British and Irish Lions. So we were coached by somebody that really knew what they were talking about. And I was pretty much hooked immediately with the ability to lift weights and see a difference in your body. And then maybe I'd be able to hand off some of the bigger guys that I didn't used to be able to hand off. Maybe I'd be able to tackle and bring down some of the people that I was less confident tackling before. But as soon as I started to see some small changes to my physique, I was really, really into it. So as soon as we were allowed to go on a Friday by ourselves, I was going twice a week. And then I got a key to go to the gym, and I could go on a Wednesday when I was 16. So I was going 3 times a week as soon as I possibly could. And then it was around all my training on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and then playing at the weekend. So I got into lifting at a pretty young age, and at the age of 30 now, I've been lifting weights ever since. I think the longest I've taken off in during that period of time has been like 3 weeks, and that was like for an injury. Apart from that, I pretty much trained 3 to 5 days to 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days when I was a bit more naive, and I thought that you didn't need a rest day. But I've been into fitness for such a long time, George, and it's formed such a major part of my life, my identity. All the things that I do within my day are massively centered around my health, my well-being, and lifting weights and feeling and looking as good as I possibly can.
I think I'm very similar to you. Like, I also got into the gym at about 15. However, you seem to have a lot more of a more guided route into it through having that physio that came in to teach you. Whereas, so you must have, I imagine, skipped that sort of big learning curve where you sort of go in the gym and you don't really know what to do. And was it a lot more structured when you sort of started the gym?
That's a really good point. It was very structured initially. So when we were getting coaching from, his name was Dave McLean, he would take us through like traditional strength and conditioning. Now, rugby has come an awfully long way. I still think it's actually behind some other sports when it comes to strength and conditioning. There's a big focus on squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing, but there was a lot less focus on some of the other areas of your body that you maybe want to build up when it comes to being injury proof. So much so that when I was maybe 17, I probably weighed about 70 kilos and I was bench pressing like 100 for like 2 or 3 reps. And I had this really overdeveloped chest, but a really underdeveloped upper mid back. I didn't do any face pulls, I didn't do any external rotation. I could do pull-ups because I was still light and it was easy, like kind of strength to body weight conversion, but I didn't do many T-bar rows. I didn't do many single dumbbell rows to try and build up that area of my back. So the programming was reasonable, but whenever I was let loose myself, I did what you probably did when you got started. Lots of bench, lots of dumbbell curls, lots of barbell curls, trying to get those beach muscles as big as possible. So I did develop a few different imbalances, and there was no guidance when it came to like progressive overload or frequency of training your muscles 2 to 3 times a week. All that kind of stuff was pretty neglected. The technique side of things was dialed in though. Like, so I was taught how to squat, I was taught how to bench, I was taught how to deadlift from a very young age. So my technique was always pretty good. And while we were all trying to get big and strong and move lots of weight, I never was really a massive ego lifter. We didn't do a lot of 1 rep maxes and stuff like that. It wasn't massively important to us. We kind of always did like 3 to 6 reps is like our lowest. So I missed out some of the nonsense, George, but I was still the kind of typical young bro lifter who wanted to get jacked to get more birds.
Yeah, hitting arms, hitting chest. I first joined the gym when I was, like I say, 15. I basically came off the back of a growth spurt. I grew like 8 inches in 6 months, but not putting any weight at the same time. So in school, I was actually quite small, but then all of a sudden I was like 6'2" at 15. And I just started going to the gym because basically I'd be hanging around every night for my mates to like be ready to come out and go to the park or whatever. So I'd walk straight down after school every Monday to Friday. We were allowed to be in the gym until 5 o'clock as kids. So I'd just be smashing everybody. I'd be basically doing full body 5 times a week. And then I took it upon myself to start reading the old bodybuilding.com, started looking at YouTube videos on form. Like I was really big on form from quite early on, because I was thinking like I'd rather do it right than do a weight that was too heavy to then completely mess up my body at like such a young age, especially when you're still growing as well. So yeah, I think everyone has their own ways of getting into it, and then we sort of find our way. And as things have advanced with social media and more information's out there and accessible, then I think that helps people, especially now. I think it's just navigating through all the crap, basically.
I do think we're a lot luckier with the level of information that's available now. Like I'm 30, George. I don't know. I think you're maybe.
I'm 26.
Yeah, so you're a few years younger than that. But when I was coming up and moving away, maybe from just the training I was getting through rugby, the resources were bodybuilding.com. Trying to think what else I would have looked at, other forums. And then probably around 2012, YouTube started to become a thing in terms of fitness YouTube. And then I would say that I started to watch that. I would have been like 2nd or 3rd year at university at this point, and I started to watch Chris Jones, who was Physiques of Greatness. I saw a little bit of Matt Ogus. Christian Guzman was only just starting. So I saw Guzman when he maybe had like 50,000 subscribers, and now obviously
I think I was around that time as well.
So he was one of the really early ones, but there was loads of other guys that were creating like really informative content. There was a guy called Michael Corey, who I don't know if he's still going, but at that point in time he was like very big on like push pull legs, hitting your muscles 2 to 3 times a week, progressive overload. This is how you track your macros. And so when I was starting to learn about nutrition, I was also falling at a level with rugby. I'd played gents rugby for a couple of years when I was at university. I was still enjoying it, but I was getting injured quite a lot. I was actually having quite a lot of problems with my shoulder because of the imbalance between my chest and my back up until that point. And so when I was getting information online about training your body more overall, and like particularly if you have like a dominant muscle, having like almost a 2-to-1 ratio between pulling versus pushing, which is a key thing for a lot of people who particularly have desk jobs or have a particularly dominant muscle. And as young guys, we all typically have like a stronger chest because it's more tempting to train. So when I was going into this YouTube stuff, I was like, wow, I can actually make mad changes to my body if I just employ a slightly more scientific approach. But it was still like semi-bro science. It wasn't kind of the stuff that maybe somebody like Jeff Nippard started to share maybe 2 years, 3 years after that. The early days were very much these young guys that were telling you how they were structuring their training, what they were eating. They were eating pretty clean. They were training pretty high volume, high reps, but it was all cool stuff, and like you could see where it was all going. And I noticed some pretty significant changes in my physique where I got my six pack for the first time. I noticed I was actually able to do lots of different movement. I was getting a lot less pain in my shoulder because my back had developed, and I was able to do face pulls and band pull aparts and all these different things that were almost like prehab before actually coming up with something that would be a more serious injury.
Yeah, one of the ones that I went and watched was, I don't know if you heard of him, Scott Herman. I think he's still actually around as well. He must be about
an OG, Scott
40,
Herman. Yeah,
45 by now.
I think he's Canadian or
I'm not sure. He's over the pond somewhere though, isn't he?
Yeah, he used to wear those red shorts. He was jacked, to be fair, like a really aesthetic physique. So like young guys like us would look at him and be like, "That's achievable," because I'm pretty sure he's natural. Like he would be like near the natural limit for what's possible, but still pretty inspiring.
Yeah, and he did really good sort of informative form videos. So I watched probably a lot of him back then. The only thing is, I didn't at that age really look too much into the nutrition side of things. I did a little bit, but probably it was more, like 15, 16, you're not too worried about your diet and things like that. And then I actually went into rowing, and I was training 9 times a week with rowing. So I think if back then I'd knew a bit more about the nutrition and recovery side of things, I may have been a bit better on that. But yeah, we can't go back in time, can we?
I think everything you learn at those points is valuable to look back on, and some of the stuff you laugh at, like I was saying that I haven't really had more than 3 weeks of not training throughout 15 years of lifting weights, but there was periods in the middle where I was ignorant and I trained 7 days a week because I just thought the more you train the better. But you look back now, and if I tried to train 7 days now, I just wouldn't function with things like my day job, with the podcast, with all the stuff that you're balancing, because your central nervous system, your CNS would just be so much in the gutter that I wouldn't be able to perform and try and be articulate and try and be like cognitively clear and work to try and perform well. But back when you're younger, you do have such high recovery capacity. I mean, you do 9 days a week rowing. You're maybe like doing some lifting on top of that. If you imagine you did that now, you would have to sacrifice something. Something would have to give at that point, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, so like I was in college at the time. I tried to work it out a couple of years ago, like how many calories I was on, and I was smashing at least 6,000 calories a day, like comfortably. And I was about 2 stone lighter, 2.5 stone lighter. And on top of that, I was going into college. I was trying to live like a normal teenager's life, going parties if I could. Quite a lot of the time I missed out on like a load of 18ths because I was away racing, but yeah, to try and train 9 times a week now, because it was basically a double session on a Saturday and Sunday. So you go out for 2 hours, come back, have something to eat, straight back out for another like hour and a half on the water. And if I attempted that now, like I used to fall asleep every weekend after training, and I'd be in class at college, like dozing off. Like there'd be a teacher like writing on the wall, and you'd turn around and go, "George, what's the answer?" And I'm like, I have no idea, because I completely just blanked out for about 2 minutes.
I think it gets worse as you juggle other things as well. So like I definitely don't have the training capacity that I used to, even in my mid-20s, because of the level of stress through work and the targets and the income that I'm responsible for, the podcast, bills, like owning a property, paying a mortgage, like having different expenses. These things all add up, and it's funny how you now have to be a bit more cognizant of what you choose to put your energy towards and be a little bit more selective. And while I'm still chasing high levels of aesthetics and a good physique and good training, I do have to be more careful about how I program things and a bit more wise. And that's not to say that I don't still train at a pretty intense level, and if somebody randomly decided to come and train with me, they'd probably think I was a bit of a lunatic and a bit of a savage. But it's all relative to what your body needs to progress at this point in time versus maybe what I used to do when I was maybe trying to progress every single week to like the maximum extent. It's not quite possible anymore.
Yeah, I'm very similar on that point. Like put it this way, back in college, I wouldn't have to plan anything out. I'd remember it, what I've got on. Now, straight in the diary. I don't want to forget anything. More of a thing from, I don't want to let someone down if I've got something planned with someone. But now, in terms of going to the gym, I don't necessarily smash every single session. I like to say that I train at sort of an 80%, but I can do that forever. Like, I don't have to take like a back off week or deload weeks. I can train at a point where I'm still progressing, just not flat out. And that suits me a lot better, because especially, say if I'm going to play football, I don't want to be absolutely goose because I've just done like a heavy leg session a couple of days ago. Like, I'm basically ticking over at this point.
Yeah, exactly that. And like, having seen your training and your physique and stuff like that, you aren't a million miles away from your natural potential unless you were to dial in absolutely everything in one way. So you would probably have to quit football if you wanted to add an extra inch to both your quads and to get them slightly more striated next time you cut down. But what is the upside to that? Is there actually a benefit to that? And I do think going like monk mode and achieving like the best possible physique you can is something that every fitness interested guy or girl should do for a period and just see what's possible. But for longevity, training at 80%, pushing yourself like as hard as you can occasionally, and doing other things alongside that with it that feel good as well as make you look good is vitally important. And that's where the longevity in training and a fitness lifestyle lies, rather than the extreme ends of either spectrum that you can go towards.
Yeah, I've had my brothers sort of say to me before, like, why don't you really go and push yourself? And I'm like, because it's not going to give me any sort of benefit. Like, the risk, or not even necessarily the risk, like just the enjoyment of it. Like, I've been asked by people, oh, will you ever do like a physique competition? I'm like, I've thought about it just to see what I could get to, but the actual gain that I'm going to get off the back of it is pretty minimal. It's going to be a couple of decent photos for Instagram probably, and a couple of well dones, and that's probably about it.
If the why isn't strong enough, you won't push yourself to what you're truly capable of. And I've had this conversation with a few different people on the podcast, and one of the most recent ones that springs to mind is I interviewed a guy called Simon Jeffries, who was in the Special Forces, served in Afghanistan, obviously passed some incredible feats to make it to the Special Forces and be part of the SBS. And he said he found that easy because his why was he wanted to be in the military. He wanted to be in the Special Forces. He wanted to push himself. When he left the military, he worked in London as a management consultant and was basically having like anxiety and panic attacks on the train to work every day because he just didn't enjoy it. It wasn't his why. Right. All he was doing it was money, whereas in the military, he felt like he had a purpose and like a bigger contribution. So in the same way, if you decided randomly to do a physique show for a few photos from Instagram and some gratification online, it wouldn't feel as aligned and as key to you to actually go and do it if it's not really like within your value set. If it's not something you really want, it's not the best idea to put all your eggs in one basket and chase after that. It's much better to adopt the approach that you do and feel good about it than to maybe chase after a goal that's in line with what social media has maybe told you to do or somebody's told you to do, because of course you're into fitness, you should do a show. That doesn't need to be the case if it's not something that's like important to you. Yeah,
it's exactly that. There's other things outside of fitness that I enjoy doing. It's like going for a pint with the lads after the footy, or it's going for some food. Obviously, I still track. I'm currently actually cutting down a little bit. I've got a holiday in 3 weeks, so looking to trim down a little bit.
Nice.
But it's just things like that. Like, you have to put off so many things by entering one of these physique competitions, and they tend to be around the summertime, when all the fun stuff starts to happen, like going out on a weekend, going out for food, holidays. And like you say, it just doesn't sort of align with what I want to do. So maybe in the future, who knows, but there's no point. Like, and I see a lot of people now, especially really on in the sort of fitness journeys. I hate that sort of saying, but it's just the common phrase, isn't it? But a lot of people at that early stage all of a sudden are prepping for the first bodybuilding competition. I'm like, you've got not only a load of newbie gains to sort of get hold of, you're very new to the gym, so the chances of you actually committing to it properly are going to be reasonably minimal, because you may not even enjoy going to the gym. You've been there for a month, and it's just something that I think people really need to have a sit down, because there's so much damage that you can do to your hormone levels, your body in general, mentally. I see a lot of people coming up with like mental health issues on the back of sort of these preps, because it does get to that sort of probably couple of weeks out where it is a real sort of grinding. You have got to dig deep, and I think people really need to have a sit down and have a think of whether it's actually worth doing or not.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I definitely think you need to make sure that any decision or goal that you chase after is in line with your value set. Otherwise, there's every chance that you don't put your heart and soul into it, or if you do put your heart and soul into it, the cost and the sacrifice is larger than you're actually willing to if you were to really think about it.
Yeah, definitely. So we obviously spoke about you having a 9 to 5 as well, around your podcast and the sort of influence side of thing, the content creation, working with MyProtein like myself. How do you actually go about balancing it all? Like, we've already sort of touched on it a little bit, but what is your sort of structure of working around things?
I'm fortunate that I work from home the majority of the time, and some people would have hated that during the C19 stuff, but I worked from home for like 4.5 years before that, so I was pretty used to not necessarily going to the office, but I had clients pretty much from Birmingham up to and around Scotland, albeit I'm sometimes in London. So I do have travel in my work, but I would say 3 to 4 days minimum I'm at home on an average week. And then on a non-average week, I'm like 2 to 3 days traveling. So more often than not, I am working from home, which allows you a lot of time around your day, whether that's to get your steps in, whether that's to create some content between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., whether that's finishing up at 5:30 as I've done today and jump straight on a podcast with yourself, or jump on one of my own shows. And giving yourself that minimal commute time allows you to have a little bit more time. And I know some people don't want to hear that if they work in an office, but that works for me. Equally, making sure that my training is pretty much set in stone as a non-negotiable. You were talking about diary management earlier in terms of putting stuff down and knowing what's happening. I am pretty relentless in my planning of when I can train, especially when I've got travel with work. So if I know I'm in Manchester for 2 days next week, best believe I know what gym I'm using on the Tuesday evening, what gym I might use on the Wednesday morning if I need to, or when I get back to Glasgow on the Wednesday evening, how am I going to train, or is it a rest day? How am I going to get to the gym? What am I going to do? Having all these things planned in is absolutely vital, and I very much am a big fan of the term non-negotiables, and that means that when I am as stretched as possible, having certain things that always happen regardless of where my mood or my feelings are at, they happen anyway, whether that's preparing for a podcast and doing my research and having my questions and my topics ready, whether that's turning up to the gym or to hit legs, even if I've had a really stressful day and a lot of travel and I'm tired, whether that's going to an event with work until 10 o'clock at night, but knowing that I need to get up the next day and get a 6 a.m. train to Birmingham. These things just have to happen, and you have to sometimes fight through the inertia and the difficulty to make sure that they happen, and having those non-negotiables and those lines in the sand. And some of those things might be relatively easy, some of those things might be relatively hard, but it's all relative to who I am as a person, because some of those things that I do feel easy to me and they might find hard for others. Equally, somebody might have things that they find really easy, but I'm like, oh my god, I hate doing that, because we're all wired differently and we all have different things that we find are our strengths and our weaknesses.
Definitely, and I think it's when that motivation isn't there to do these things, it's where discipline kicks in and sort of kicks those tasks over the line. And I think we come from a very similar sort of background where obviously we've got the corporate side and we are pretty used to organising ourselves in general from that sort of standpoint. And then that we've allowed that to flow into our sort of hobbies outside of work. I do very similar. I block out time. Like, I sit down every sort of Saturday or Sunday, plan out what I've got for the week, and basically just allocate like reasonable amounts of time. I think that's another thing. If you allocate a certain amount of time to something, that is how long it's probably going to take you. I think it's called Parkinson's law.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think you've just got to be very meticulous with it and stick to those timings. I have my set workouts that I do each week, whether they get done on, like you said, when you've got potentially a train coming home on Wednesday, is it going to be a rest day or is it going to go into the next day sort of thing? It's very much regardless of what I've got on during that week, those 4 or 5 workouts are getting done. And I think that's where a lot of people would probably benefit from, is if they're not in that sort of corporate environment where you do have to plan your time quite well, to start doing that sort of on, like I say, on a Saturday or Sunday. Plan your next week out, know what you've got on, and things are going to get probably a lot more likely to get done, especially when you get like those reminders up on your phone saying, right, it's time to go to the gym, let's go. It just gives you that sort of extra little kick, doesn't it?
I'm definitely wired in a way that benefits from routine and habits and planning.
Same.
But my more spontaneous friends, even the more spontaneous friends that maybe like to do things a bit more off the cuff, the most successful ones that I know still have certain things that are like cornerstones within their diary that always happen at similar times, because as human beings, even if you're somebody that likes new experiences and fun and novelty, there's still an element of my human mind still benefits from knowing that Thursday at 5 o'clock is when I do spin, or when I do Zumba, or when I do legs, or when I do whatever it is. These people still benefit from that, even if they are somebody that maybe optimizes for doing different things more often than not. They still know that there's certain things that always happen within their calendar. And I'm certainly somebody that benefits massively from that. But like you say, sometimes you do just have to fit things in based on other things coming up that are not more important, but more immovable. And it's funny that you mentioned the corporate world, because even some people that thrive in that space, and like look at the number of people in the corporate world that are actually obese now. Like if you look around an office, you'll look around, you'll be like, oh wow, like there's not that many people that are really looking after their health. And I hosted Jordan Syatt on the podcast, who was quite well known for coaching Gary V, so Gary Vaynerchuk, who is this incredible entrepreneur who didn't really look after his health until about 5-6 years ago, when he actually started getting coached by Jordan. And one of the revolutionary things that he did with him was basically being like, you know that meeting that you have for... He basically will book back-to-back dinners from like 6 p.m. all the way through to like 11 p.m. at night. He was like, in the way that you do that and book all these dinners with investors and different companies and whatever else you're doing, the gym session that I'm telling you needs to happen 3 or 4 days a week needs to be booked in your diary as well. And he was like, oh, like I'd never thought of it like that. And he basically booked these in as meetings. So his gym session became meetings. So I think people can benefit massively from that, in the same way that you know that at 10 o'clock every Tuesday you have your teams catch up with your colleagues. Maybe at lunchtime every Thursday needs to be your gym session, or every Tuesday at 6 p.m. is when you do your gym session. Come rain, come shine, that needs to happen. Yeah.
Well, that's like I'm quite flexible if things can move. If something comes up that's maybe less immovable, I am flexible in moving things around, and I do leave sort of space to go. This is your fun time. Like, do whatever you want. Like, there's nothing planned, so spend it how you want. And but yeah, some people do just need that little prompt to sort of, like I say, kick them up the arse a little bit. Even if it's like, get your steps done. Like it could be a little prompt that just pushes you to sort of get up and go and do something. Because I find especially a lot of people in the office do tend to just sit through the lunch quite often. And I think quite a lot of people I've found think they are more busy than they actually are. There's a lot of things that people do. Well, a lot of people procrastinate throughout the day. I do it sometimes myself, and I'm like, oh, I've done not a lot for the last half an hour. But yeah, I think people think they're a lot busier than they actually are. So if they actually started prompting these other things, then I think they get their stuff done in a lot shorter space of time to allow them to do these things. And I've found a lot of, especially I've been in the corporate world for the last 8.5 years, quite a lot of things can go over into the next day. They don't have to be done that day. And I think a lot of people kill themselves to try and get something done, when by the time you've finished that, the person that you were meant to send it to has already finished. He's at home with the kids having dinner. So regardless of whether you send it them at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday or first thing in the morning on a Wednesday, it doesn't make any difference, because that's when they're going to see it.
It's funny,
and
isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that discipline equals freedom in work. And if
Massively.
I can concentrate and not procrastinate and try and stay off my personal phone during the hours of 9 till 12 in particular, I tend to have like 3 really deep focused hours of like work on my actual day job. And by doing that, I definitely find I have a higher level of output than the average employee, and it's allowed me to progress my career to a really good extent in the business development world, in terms of I'll do a lot of my prospecting, I'll do a lot of my emails, I'll do a lot of my presentations first thing in the morning, and then my more reactive work with people coming back to me and maybe existing meetings that I've got booked will be in the afternoon. And that allows me to have an element of structure to my day, but also an element of productivity that I know I've ticked off the major boxes. So if I get 3 hours of good work done in the morning, that might be more than most people get done across like an 8 hour period, because I've just had like really high quality work during that time and I've not been distracted by Instagram, TikTok or WhatsApp or anything like that. Like, some people actually joke that if they get a WhatsApp from me between like 9 and 12, they're like, oh fuck, like what are you doing on your phone? And it's obviously that slips sometimes. We're all human and devices are very, very powerful when it comes to grabbing our attention, but doing the thing that we said we're going to do and sitting in the task and getting it done in those moments allows me to be more free in the afternoon to maybe pick up my phone and post a reel on Instagram or post a story or email back a podcast guest to get organised, and it frees up a lot more time, and it means that I am able to finish at 5:30 to go and train or to do another podcast or to go to the golf range or go to the football or see a friend socially, whatever it is, because you've done the work that you said you were going to do in the time that you said you were going to do it and committed to it.
Yeah, I think that's very key, that people have got to sort of take away, because like I say, when the work starts going into your sort of free time, the sort of hours outside your paid working hours, then people start using that as a crutch as to why they've not gone to the gym or why they've not done the things that they said they were going to do. Oh, I was working till 7 o'clock, I had to get home and make the tea, and then by that point it was 8 o'clock and it was too late because my favourite show was on. And it's having that discipline to sort of give yourself that work-life balance. And I think, yeah, I see it quite a lot. Like I say, people make themselves busier than they necessarily have to be.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And in the same way, like you say, your work day can extend into your personal hours. Your personal hours can extend into your work day if you're blasting 20 minutes of TikTok here and there between meetings. And one of the things that I learned from Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, is that it takes us around 18 minutes after we've had a notification or checked a notification to get back into the same level of flow and deep work as you were previously. So that's a bit of a frightening thought when it comes to maybe checking Instagram for 2 minutes. You've actually disrupted the quality, maybe not the amount of work, but the quality of your work for up to 18 minutes afterwards, which is absolutely crazy if you think about what a work day looks like in terms of time. If you're losing 18 minutes every time you check your phone, you're going to be pretty fucked.
Yeah, if you do it once an hour, it adds up, doesn't it, across the whole day?
Yeah, deadly. Yeah,
Wow.
Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, but it can work negatively as well. So yeah, it's definitely a funny one. I think if you have some sort of boundaries, particularly digital boundaries, like I'm not, because of the amount of content I'm posting and creating, it is hard to be a digital nomad, but I am a minimalist when it comes to certain things. So like, I'll try and be phone free between 9 p.m. at night and 8 a.m. in the morning, and that means that I'll have like my phone on charge at 9 o'clock. I'll wake up in the morning, I'll do my morning routine, which will typically be hydrate, bit of stretching, go for a walk, journal, and then I'll engage with my phone. But during that time, I will have a podcast on that's been pre-downloaded, and I'll be like, hey Siri, play whatever podcast it is, and it'll play and it's pre-downloaded. And it just means that I'm not necessarily like engaging with WhatsApp, Instagram before 8 a.m. and I've almost served myself first. And I do find that my focus as the day goes on is so much better if I've not engaged with my screen straight away. And Andrew Huberman's sharing all sorts of data now that your actual brain waves are different if you engage with your phone first thing in the morning, and it dictates your mood as well. So say you got a notification from a WhatsApp where you were getting pelters from in the group chat, or a friend or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever, and they were giving you a hard time, you'd be like, oh fuck, it really messes with your mood early on. By serving yourself first, listening to something stimulating, by stretching, by journaling, by getting your thoughts out, or planning your day, or whatever it is that you choose to do, or meditating, whatever floats your boat, you give yourself the best opportunity to do really well. And I find that my best days are when my morning routine's been strong and I've started well, and my evening routine the day before has been good too, where I've come off my phone, I've read, I've journaled, I've relaxed, I've felt good.
I think it's something that I definitely need to get better at, and I am trying to sort of work on. Like you say, like we're both posting that much content, it's hard not to be on these things. And then it only takes one little sort of reel, and then you're scrolling for 20 minutes and you didn't even realise it. And then, like, you you post your podcast content on your sort of main page, don't you? I've got a podcast account, I've got my fitness account, and then I've got the same for YouTube, and I've got the same on TikTok. So I've essentially got 6 accounts where, don't get me wrong, I'm posting the same content across 3 of them in sort of short form content clips.
Of course.
But it doesn't take that long for you to sort of get hooked on a little, like in a wormhole, essentially. That's what I call it. But
of course it does. You really do fall down that trap, and it's easy to end up consuming when you post. But yeah, like if you can have relative discipline, post, show up, come off, and then have set blocks when you go and do it. Like again, one of the most incredible authors that I've had on the show has been Nir Eyal, who's the author of Indistractable, which is all about channeling our focus, doing the things that we're saying we're going to do. And he's very much of the opinion if you batch things, you can do better. So if you say, for example, between 4:30 and 5 p.m, I'm going to have my phone and I'm going to post this reel. I'm going to reply to comments. I'm going to reply to DMs during this period. And then at 5, if you have a hard stop and you commit to that, you're probably more likely to not extend through that and waste time and have dead time, and you're going to make the most of the 30 minutes that you have chosen to engage with Instagram. But that's like, it's so hard to do, but if you build that as a habit, and I know that between like 8 a.m. and 9 a.m, sorry, like for that hour before I start real work, I'm quite good at just posting, doing my stories, doing my reels, doing my TikTok, doing my YouTube, whatever it is. And then between 9 and 12, it's like full work mode, and I have like a real shift in identity. I'm work Colin and I'm content creator Colin at different times. Yeah,
I think it is difficult, especially when you're doing both. Because obviously I've got my PT business as well on Instagram, so I might be messaging people on Instagram as well, potentially throughout the day. If I check have a little check, I may have a couple of messages. I've always had this issue. I mean, it's good and it's bad. I hate leaving people waiting for a message. Say if I've seen it, I'm replying straight away. And then if I get another message before I've gone off my phone, I'm replying to that one. I think one of the things is I don't want to forget that I had a message there, and I don't want to leave someone waiting for 2 days. But yeah, it's definitely something I need to work on and get that balance.
I definitely consider myself to be really responsive, but I would say in the last 6 months, when the podcast has grown a lot, maybe not even necessarily Instagram, but the engagement for the podcast in terms of Instagram messages has grown. It's been harder to keep track of my DMs than ever before. But I do tend to try and reply as much as possible. And one of the main tricks or hacks that I've got, particularly if somebody listening to this as a creator, is doing Instagram DM replies on your laptop. So that's instagram.com/direct/inbox. And it means that you can type, which you'll probably be able to do faster on a laptop than you will be over your phone. And you're not going to end up watching stories, because you don't want to watch stories in your laptop. It's just not aesthetic. It's just not nice visually for your own eyes. And you end up not going down the rabbit hole. So if you are somebody that has a lot of DMs to work your way through, and I typically do that in the morning and go through them all, because I'll maybe have feedback for the podcast or whatever's been released overnight. And if somebody's taking the time to listen to an hour of me and a guest, and they're giving me feedback on it, I'm going to take time to give them a proper reply. But if I was to do that just on my phone, best believe my chimp brain is going to tell me to go and look at some stories, to look at some reels, what's on the feed, and then I lose more time. So I definitely recommend, if anyone has a lot of replies or conversations to have, to use their laptop or their a browser to deal with DMs.
It's definitely a good tip. And speaking of the podcast, Cambro Conversations, you've recently hit the top 1% of podcasts, which makes a change. It's not top 1% of a subscription-based adult website, so congratulations.
Yes. I don't know whether I'd make it into the top 1% of OnlyFans, but I've certainly managed to do it in the podcast world. So no, thank you very much, George. It's been a long, steady process. Started the podcast on the 1st of April 2020. It wasn't an April Fool's joke, but it was definitely something serious. And we're like 100, at the time of recording this conversation anyway, we're about 175 episodes in. So I've certainly done the reps in terms of 1 every single week as a minimum, but 2 probably on average every 4th week. And that's really, really built up, and we've done the reps, and we've built up to a really strong audience with a wide range of different conversations. So it's been a project that I'm really pleased about, and I genuinely believe that the top 1% is like scratching the surface. And I never thought it would get to that, but now it's started to get to that. I definitely think there's more to come, and I just need to keep the quality high, but of course the consistency with that as well.
Yeah, consistency is definitely one of the things which I mean, I haven't been with mine. I started mine in January 2021, so about just under a year after yours. And so I did season one during one of the lockdowns because basically my plan was to get out there and meet more people that I'd known through Instagram, do some sort of workouts, vlogs, and then obviously lockdown ruined all that. So I thought, let's start a podcast and speak to them that way and get to know people. And sort of smashed out, I think it was about 15 episodes pretty quickly. Didn't have it planned out very well at all because I was basically filming a podcast and then about a day later it was up, or sometimes it was the very next day, and I'd be like, right, it's up, go watch it, and I wouldn't have time to get clips, and then next minute I was filming the next podcast, and it just wasn't sustainable at all. Had a little bit of a break, came back then, I think it was basically the start of 2022, and then I got a new job and things sort of got in the way, and it sort of took my attention away from that, and now we are back. This is episode 6. So I think total we're looking at about 25 podcasts, so a fair few less than yourself, but we've actually got a plan this time to make it a lot more sustainable, like we were speaking about before.
It has to fit around your lifestyle and your expectations, and I've got friends that have done like a fortnightly show to build it up and just made sure they've released, because the main thing for me, and if I think about my own listening habits, is if I typically upload as a minimum, I upload every single Sunday, and then occasionally if you get a second episode, it'll be on a Wednesday. So people know that in their inbox at 5 a.m. on a Sunday will be a Canberra conversation. Whether that's a Sunday they listen to it, or whether it's a Monday they listen to it in their commute, or whether it's, I listen to it when I go for my long walk on a Tuesday, whatever it is, they can rely on that, and you build a listenership who rely upon that, and that's been a very important thing for me. And I know kind of top podcasters like Chris Williamson, like Stephen Bartlett, they have this regular upload schedule, and their audience know when they can expect to listen to that episode, even if they don't get a notification to say new episode that's gone up. They know that for Modern Wisdom, for example, Monday, Wednesday, Saturdays, or Monday, Thursday, Saturday, when his episodes go up, and they can just rely upon that. So I think mimicking what the top guys do to some extent within our own capabilities is always a good way to behave.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to have a plan with it. And like I said to you before, sort of the second episode goes live this Sunday. But I'm literally 5 podcasts ahead now. Great. So I've got that sort of backlog where if I don't, for whatever reason, say if I'm sick for a whole week and I don't manage to get a guest on, I've still got 2 or 3 podcasts in the sort of backlog. But so like going back to the start of the podcast, what actually got you sort of podcasting in the first place? What was the reason? Was there any sort of inspiration behind it? What was the reason it started?
I had been a guest on, I think, 5 or 6 podcasts in like January 2019 through till about June. So in the first 6 months of 2019, I'd probably been on 5 or 6 different podcasts. And each time I was sharing with my Instagram audience, and I was getting really good feedback where people were saying, oh, it was great to hear from you, like in longer form rather than just your Instagram posts and your stories. Would you consider doing your own? And the answer was yes. I definitely thought that I had potential to do that. My day job is business development, account management, so I'm constantly presenting and work quite often over video calls or in meetings. So I had a skill set where I was used to communicating, asking questions, doing research, asking more questions, listening back, objection handling, diving deeper, whatever it was. So the skill set definitely overlapped. And it pretty much took until the lockdown in March 2020 for me to find the time to be like, right, okay, I can definitely do this. But I'd actually bought the equipment during 2019. I'd bought a new mic, I'd bought a new Mac, because my one from university was running like it was powered by a hamster wheel. I bought a new webcam, I bought a ring light, all the kind of basic bits and pieces that you would need to launch. I upgraded my Zoom, which was what I used at the time to record remotely. So I had all the stuff, but I just didn't take the action to start. But when the lockdown came, I kind of lost all that excuse, and I recorded, I think, 5 or 6 episodes to bank them before I started. And then I hosted Chris Williamson, who's the host of Modern Wisdom. Chris was my launch episode, and I'd kind of known him on and off through Instagram, and being a big listener to Modern Wisdom as well, I'd like shared a lot of feedback and the discussion with him. So he was my launch episode, which helped me start off really strongly. And
Some
from
first
there,
episode.
yeah, it was cool, man. He's a great guy. He's very, very supportive, and I genuinely think one of the most talented podcasters there is in the world. And I don't think that's arguable now. If you watch some of the stuff that he's done, going on Rogan and some of the quality guests he had, even having Goggins recently. But I guess my decision to be a host of a podcast was driven by being a guest 5 or 6 times and just thinking, oh, I could definitely do this. I can bring value. I'm not somebody that necessarily thinks he can predict what's coming next, but I definitely thought as a platform it was underdeveloped. At that point in time, podcasts were not as common. I think a lot started during the lockdown, obviously yourself as well, but it's still a relatively new area. I am firmly of the belief that audio platforms are like the new printing press for the future generations, where I think people will get more of their news, more of their insights, more of their opinions via audio than they will through newspapers, because newspapers are on the decline and I think podcasts are on the up. And I think even though it seems saturated now to some extent, I think there's something like 4.6 million podcasts. Wow. It's quite easy to rise to the top to a relative extent. I'm not saying to the top 1%, that's been a lot of hard work for me, but to get into even like the top 20%, you pretty much just need relative consistency to improve your questioning, to improve your ability to listen, to improve your quality of guest, and just carry on and on and on. I think that's extremely doable for most people that put in the work and put in the effort to improve your skill set and just get that little bit better each time that you turn up and interview someone.
I think it's like that with anything in life, though, isn't it? If you put the work in, you're going to be better than most people. It doesn't take a lot. You even have to look at the sort of fitness accounts on Instagram. How many of those have started up since the lockdowns, people working out from home, and then they haven't posted for 2 years? Like, if you put the reps in, like you say, it's not necessarily easy to get to the top, but it's not necessarily as hard as people probably think it is. Like you say, you get a decent camera, you get a decent mic, you get the decent setup, and you're halfway there if you're relatively consistent with the uploading.
Yeah, exactly that. One of the big things that I've definitely discovered is just like making sure the quality improves over time. So some people obsess over like what logo am I going to have, what camera I'm going to use, what mic I'm going to have. So like those are like entry points, but actually recording 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 episodes, that's when you really start to notice, oh wow, like there's some episodes I listen back to that are early on where I was like trying to like find out how I could improve, and I'm like, okay, I actually performed quite well on that one. And then there's others I listen back to, I'm like, oh Colin, like my questions were too long, they were too convoluted, or my questions were too short, they weren't detailed enough, whatever it was. There's lots of different mistakes that I made, but each of those mistakes and those reps that I did, I've managed to learn from. And I think like anything, you can apply that. So like in the same way, when I listened back to like different cold calls that I'd made in work when I was trying to win a new client or get a new meeting, I realized quite quickly there was elements that I could improve that. So I just applied that to the podcast as well. And it's just taken time to become more clear, more concise, better researched, better guests. Everything is very, very gradual, but the quality piece is massive. So while I could have consistently uploaded once or twice a week, if I hadn't leveled up bits and pieces of how I speak and how I interact, then I would kind of be of a similar place. But by doing that, that's why it's got to kind of the more frightening stats where it's like top 1% in the world. Like that feels crazy. But I definitely think with just consistency, I could be like top 20%, but by improving the quality, it's been able to go to that next kind of stratosphere.
I think it's definitely a learning process, isn't it? I find a lot of people in just any sort of general hobby or anything like that people wait until everything's perfect and everything's all in a line before they actually start to do something. Like I personally started this podcast on my work's laptop with my work's headset, and the audio quality is not great, like at all. Now I'm on like a Blue Yeti mic. Yourself, you're on is it a Shure? Those things just like take it up a little notch, and but that didn't happen straight away. Like I started from the bottom, and then you work your way up by doing those reps. You get the practice, your conversations get better, your questions are going to get better. And like I say, too many people don't do things because the surroundings and the environment aren't perfect right away. And like I've gone through different logos, different like equipment, like it's like you say, you listen back to yourself, you get feedback, you change things, you try and get better each time. It's similar in the gym. You didn't start off by lifting 100 kilos on the bench, did you? You started off with the bar, and over time you got better and better and stronger, and it's the same with podcasting.
Exactly that, exactly that. And I almost wouldn't have it any other way. There's definitely some things that I would have done sooner or faster, but at the same time, I don't really regret a lot of the stuff along the way because I've never been in a rush and I never had an expectation that it would get to even where it's at just now. But I do feel that if I keep working, it could go anywhere really potentially, and I just want to keep doing the work and give it the best possible chance. Like, one of my biggest values in life is making sure that I fulfill any level of potential that I do have. I have no idea what that potential might be. It could be really high, it could be moderate, it could be really low, but I would only regret if I didn't give myself the opportunity to explore whatever potential looks like, and that means hard work, discipline, habits, routines that give me the best opportunity to find out what that potential might well be.
I've had similar questions in the workplace, so like senior management saying, George, what level do you want to get to? And I'm like, as high as I possibly can go. And I'm like, I don't know what that level is, but I'm going to push to that point where I find out. And it's very similar with yourself with the podcast and with the gym, with anything. Like, if you're not fulfilling that potential, then I imagine for yourself as well that it's almost wasted if you're not sort of tapping into that.
Yeah, you'd feel a level of disappointment, and you don't want to be somebody that has a lot of regrets when they're older and they're looking back. Because a lot of the time when you speak to people who are on the deathbed, and there's a lady called Bronnie Ware that I'm trying to get on the podcast who wrote a book called Regrets of the Dying, and I'm going back and forth with her publisher at the moment, so we'll see if I can make it happen. Maybe by the time this comes out, I've got it booked. But she interviewed all these people that were on their deathbed, and effectively their main regrets are just not doing the things that they said they were going to do, not spending time with their family, not exploring their curiosities. So if one of your curiosities, like mine, is to find out what I'm capable of and what might be possible if I put in the effort, then best believe I'm going to try and do that.
Yeah, definitely. It's better to give it a go and fail than to not try and never find out. So with that being said, what is the actual goal with your podcast? Do you have a sort of idea of where you want it to get to? Do you want to potentially do it full time and take away the day job to then potentially be a full-time content creator? What is the sort of end goal, if there is one?
It's a really difficult question to answer because I've never wanted to do Instagram full time. I never really wanted to be a fitness coach. I think if I was to do any form of coaching, it would primarily be like more like lifestyle or productivity or mindset related, with a side of fitness, of course, because I think physical health underpins almost everything that you do. But I was never somebody that was like massively enthusiastic or geared to be like, I want to help people from like a training and nutrition perspective. I have so many friends that are so talented and so good at that if I wasn't absolutely buzzing to do that and the process of it didn't massively excite me and to get me out of bed jumping for joy, then you're better to let the people that are brilliant at it to do that and optimize for that. So I never necessarily thought I would be like a full-time Instagram content creator. The podcast has been incredible and incredibly rewarding. It's growing to an incredible extent, as we've said, and it's growing to a really good place. But fiscally, I've not necessarily pushed it massively. Pretty much all the sponsorship money that I get from the podcast is reinvested back into studio time with guests that aren't based remotely. It's reinvested into clip creation through an editor. It's reinvested into software and equipment. I am quite happy for it to be borderline cost neutral and not be a financial outlet for me, because in my day job, touch wood, I'm fortunate to earn a good salary and good bonus and good commission and to fiscally be in a really good position with my lifestyle. So if the podcast ever tipped over, that would be amazing, but I'm not necessarily optimizing for that, and I don't think that's what I need to do at this moment in time. If I was to do it, I would probably need to launch some sort of product off the back of that I would pursue and sell, but I haven't been minded that way. At the moment, the focus with the podcast is just great conversations every week as a minimum, good quality clips being released on the short form platforms to try and entice people across to listen, and just keep having a really positive impact and value on the listeners, because the feedback you get from the podcast is mad, and I wouldn't swap that for any form of Instagram fame or notoriety.
I think that keeps it very genuine as well. If you're not trying to sell things off the back of it, because there's a lot of podcasts out there that from the get-go it's like, this podcast is sponsored by whoever, and quite often I think there's no way you're using that product. Like, quite often it's like VPNs and random websites and stuff like that, and I'm like, chances are you're not You're just doing that for a payday. And if you're keeping it really genuine, I think that is going to help keep those sort of valuable listeners that you've got watching or listening to every episode. It's going to keep them there. If you're not trying to sort of use their views for a sponsorship or some little quick commission on the side, I think that's going to keep it sort of really genuine and pushing it forward even further.
Yeah, there's no rush at all. And like I say, any company that I've had advertised on the podcast has been something that I genuinely believe in, either for myself or and for the listener as well. And that amount of money has all gone back into the podcast to try and grow it to the next extent, to reach more ears, to have more of an impact. So yeah, there's no rush. If it tipped over and became the day job, wow, that would be really cool. But it's not even in the 5-year plan at the moment. I don't see how that would happen. If it does happen and we look back on this and laugh, amazing, great. As long as the podcast is still within my value set, then if it became the day job, that'd be incredible, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's still relatively early doors, isn't it? It's not even 3 years old, the podcast, yet, and you're talking potentially 5 years down the line. So God knows how far that could be at that point. We could be sitting here thinking about it and you're the next Chris Williamson. Who knows? Yeah,
we'll see. Chris shared some mad stats the other day where he said the podcast was virtually invisible for the first 3 years. Now, virtually invisible is I would say, I think he was getting 15 to 20,000 downloads per month, which is still a lot, and it probably would have put him in the top 1% in the world. But when it's compared to 140 million downloads, which he has now, that's why it seemed virtually invisible, because it was banging away, just chipping away, building quality, doing the reps. His ability was getting better and better and better, and now it's because he's getting the level of guests he's getting, and he's got the archive. And that's something that I've definitely noticed myself. When I have an episode that goes crazy, so I had Rob Lipsett on the podcast, and my audience are quite fitness interested, and most of them will have heard of Rob Lipsett. So the episode went genuinely mental. I think it's number 5 I'm almost downloaded, but it's not been out as long as the other 4 that are up there. Yeah. But my back archive went mad as well, because people listened to Rob, they enjoyed the episode, they enjoyed the style, they enjoyed how it was hosted, and they were listening to all the ones that were in the archive as well. So there is a lot of value in having 170 odd other episodes. When you release a banger that people are like, oh, that's cool, they then go back and listen to all the other ones too, which compounds and adds, and the show just grows and grows and grows from there. Yeah, exactly. Just because someone didn't see something 2 years ago doesn't mean they're not going to see it maybe another 2 years down the line. Just like you say, if one absolutely slaps, then the chances of them going to watch another episode is probably quite likely. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I know myself and my listening habits. If I find a new podcast and I like the host, I'll go and look at what else is there and maybe what other guests I recognise or what other topics I'm particularly interested in, and that's just how you've got to approach it as well as a host too, and just make sure that you've got an archive that's interesting enough. And I certainly know that there's episodes from a year and a half, 2 years ago that maybe I feel are underplayed for the quality of episode it is, but now that the audience is bigger, they're going back and listening to it and you're like, wow, that's crazy. The work that I did back then is now is paying off again, which is a really cool feeling. George. Yeah, and speaking of other topics, a big one at the moment is sort of elective sobriety, especially in our sort of age, around the sort of 20 to 30-year-old range. It's becoming a lot more popular, not necessarily because people have got an issue or problem with alcohol. It's coming down to actually wanting to be more productive, potentially on a weekend, and using that time to fuel hobbies and things like that. Yeah, it's definitely something I've lent into on a personal basis, and I've seen huge benefits from, because one of the questions you were asking me earlier was how do you fit it all in when it comes to progressing in a corporate career, and now at director level within the company, which is really exciting. I have the podcast, I have my own fitness and health and nutrition, but also on the side, of course, you have to be social. I play golf, I watch my football team, I have a lot of friendships that I keep up as well. One of the big things has been the removal of some stuff. So I was talking about removing maybe unnecessary screen time from your day. I basically don't drink alcohol apart from a handful of times when I choose to. So I went around, I would say, it was just under 1,000 days I didn't drink from October 2019, which was my 26th birthday, through until June 2022. So that was a long time without drinking at all. During that time, I built the podcast massively. I progressed my career massively. And I not that I ever had, and this is an important point as well, like you said, alcohol is the only drug that if you don't take it, people assume you have a problem. I've never had a problem with alcohol. I don't have a history of alcoholism in my family either, which I think is important. But I do know that I'm less productive when I've been drinking. I'm more likely to cheat on my diet. I'm more likely to feel a little bit of anxiety or nerves. I'm less likely to do the things that I said I'm going to do. I'm going to have less money. I'm going to have less calories to assign to other things as well. So for me, having a period of sustained break from it and dipping in and out when I choose to is massively important. So after I broke my sobriety in June 2022, I then drank a further 3 times in the year. I drank for my friend's 30th in August, and then I drank twice when I was in Dubai on holiday as well. And both those times when I was on holiday, it just felt like it was going to add to the experience. As you can probably tell from a podcast like this and like my day job that I do, I'm quite an extroverted person, so I'd go to lots of social events and I don't feel out of place by not having alcohol.
Yeah.
But it's because it's been such a long time, George, that I also don't feel that I rely on it. Whereas when you've always just been the guy that has pints when he goes out, you do almost feel like, oh, I need to have that to have the same level of good time and to still be the lively member of the party. But that's certainly something that I've overcome over time, and I'm very glad that I've done that. And I would definitely advocate for people to be more selective of when they drink, albeit they don't need to limit it to the extent that I do. But if you're somebody that thinks they've got maybe a little bit more potential, they want to save up a little bit more money, they want to have more calories to assign to food rather than drink, they want to be fresher and clearer in their thoughts and their mindset, I would definitely encourage looking at being slightly more selective across what times they do choose to drink rather than just always doing it on autopilot.
Yeah, I think it's what you said is like it is one of those things that you are more judged if you don't do it. And I think it's because it's so deeply rooted in our sort of society in the UK that basically you work Monday to Friday, by 5 o'clock you've got a pint in your hand. And then it is a massive sort of hindrance on your productivity. I find it affects my sleep more than anything. I don't tend to get hangovers. I just, like, say if I've been on a night out, I'll wake up absolutely shattered the day after. And like you say, like with us doing so much outside of our day jobs, there's only so much time that you've got to actually get things done. And if you're spending, say, your Saturday or Sundays chilling, hanging around because you can't be asked doing anything because you've had a night out the night before, then that backlog of work that you should have got done on the Saturday or Sunday now moves on to Monday and then Tuesday, and then it's just a continuous cycle. And it's something that I'm definitely trying to get a lot more selective with in terms of choosing when to drink and potentially how much as well.
It's becoming a lot more common to opt out, and while I say people still do assume maybe you've got a problem or you're an alcoholic or you're somebody that physically cannot drink, I think there's a little bit less stigma, and I think Gen Z in particular are actually drinking far less than any generation that's come before it, which is quite interesting to see. Like, a lot of universities are doing more non-alcohol related activities for Freshers Week, for ingratiating students, because a lot of younger students are just deciding to opt out, and that's not even from like religious or cultural perspectives, it's just through choice. And I think that's great as long as people use that time that they've freed up really wisely, and I certainly think that's something that I benefited from by using that time and just feeling so much more level, because the elephant in the room is that alcohol is an element of a depressant. And if you look at the mental health crisis that we do have, a lot of people that are feeling down maybe are giving themselves an element of anxiety with a hangover. Like, it's called hangxiety, isn't it? People are just really rough on their hangover, and they're thinking about, God, what did I say? What did I do? What have I not done in terms of the tasks that are looming over them on the to-do list? So yeah, I'm a huge fan of choosing to opt out, and I would definitely say if somebody was looking to start, I would say give yourself 60 days. I think there's a lot of like sober Octobers and dry Januaries, but when you're doing these things, a lot of people maybe like shut themselves away and go like hermit mode, and they like moan about, oh, I can't wait for dry January to go over. And I'm thinking, yeah, of course, because you've chosen not to go out and you've done really boring stuff. You've like just sat in and watched a film on a Saturday. And don't get me wrong, sometimes that's great, but if you do that every weekend, of course you're going to miss the highs of socialising with your friends and having fun.
Especially if that's something that you were doing on the regular anyway. So like if you're constantly going out every weekend and then all of a sudden you stop, it almost becomes a craving. And I see a lot of people, as soon as February hits, it's just harder than ever, and they get back into the swing of things every Friday or Saturday. But I'm seeing a lot more Facebook groups for events for people that want to go out and do stuff sober instead of having a drink. And one of the ways me and my mate get around it, so we've both got the Odeon Limitless. It's £15 a month. It's not necessarily to keep us out the pub. It sounds like we've got an issue there, which we don't. We just want to do something different, and every weekend it's to the pub. So we have Odeon Limitless. It's £15 a month, which is basically the same as our ticket these days, and we can go as many times as we want. So I'm actually going on Saturday night. So yeah,
it's about replacing it. Yeah, like for example, I'll meet up with friends for a gym session, I'll meet up with friends for a walk, for a coffee, for lunch, for brunch, for dinner, whatever it is, and I'll take the car. And having activities that aren't necessarily just centered around booze is vitally important. And the fiscal aspect is something I would massively stress for people as well. Like the amount of money that I've saved off the back of not drinking regularly has been colossal. I've invested into lots of other exciting things like experiences, holidays, whatever else.
Yeah, it's definitely not cheap anymore either. You're looking at like, what, £5-6 a pint these days. So if you're saving a few of them every weekend, it's going to start adding up, and you can spend them on those other experiences to sort of fill the gaps. And it takes me back almost to like being a kid before you could drink. You start doing those things that you used to do, which was like going to the cinema, going bowling, just little thing like going for days out walks. It's just finding those ways. And I think another way that people... I've seen a lot of people use is planning something in the morning for, say, if everyone's going out on the Friday and you're not drinking, if you put something in at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, again, put it in your diary so you get that little kick up the arse to go and do it. Make sure you're doing it with another person as well, so you're not letting someone else down. And that it's just those little mechanisms to sort of keep it going almost.
Yeah, I love it, George. Big fan.
Definitely. And I think... we've spoken a lot of topics here, so I think we're going to round it up. Where can everyone find you, Colin?
George, thank you so much for having me on. Really enjoyed this. If people want to connect with me on Instagram, it's at col.cambro, which is col.cambro. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is Colin T. Campbell. And if you enjoyed this podcast, wherever you're listening to it, whether that's Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, you can hear more from me and lots of amazing guests at Cambro Conversations.
Thank you very much for coming on, Colin. I'll put all your information in the show notes below. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you drop it a like. If you're new, subscribe. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.